I'm Lee, I'm 38 years old, a woman, and I recently discovered that the very foundation of my 15-year marriage was a lie. My husband wasn't just having an affair with his best friend's wife. They were partners in a criminal scheme, so elaborate that uncovering it felt like excavating a ruin, where every layer of dirt revealed a deeper, more shocking truth. So I used my skills as an architect, my eye for detail, my patience for complex plans, to design a trap that would bring their entire world down, and in doing so, I exposed a chain of events that no one, least of all me, ever expected. Our foursome was the kind of thing people envied. There was me and my husband, Jason, and there was his best friend since college, Chris, and his wife, Maria. We weren't just friends, we were an institution. We spent holidays together, our kids were born months apart, and we owned neighboring lake houses. Jason and Chris were inseparable, brothers in all but blood. Maria and I were, I thought, just as close. She was the one I called when I had a bad day, the one who helped me pick out the dress for my 10th wedding anniversary. Jason was a real estate agent, a man powered by charisma. He could sell a house to a family who wasn't even looking to buy one, armed with nothing more than a charming smile and an unshakable confidence. I was the opposite. As an architect, I live in a world of straight lines, solid foundations, and meticulous plans. I find comfort in structure and predictability. People used to say we balanced each other out, his spontaneity with my stability. I see now that what I called spontaneity was just a capacity for chaos that I refused to acknowledge. Our friendship with Chris and Maria was built on that same dynamic. Chris, a personal trainer, was quiet, gentle, and deeply loyal, the steady anchor to Jason's high-energy sailboat. Maria, a sales director for a major tech firm, was a firecracker. She was ambitious, sharp-tongued, and fiercely competitive, but always in a way that seemed invigorating. We thought their personalities complemented each other, just like ours. Looking back, the signs were there, small cracks in the facade that I had dismissed as unimportant. For instance, there was the matter of Jason's professional jealousy. For years, I was the primary breadwinner. My architectural firm was successful, and my income provided us with the life Jason loved to show off. The nice cars, the exotic vacations, the lake house. He was a good real estate agent, but his income was commission-based and wildly inconsistent. A few years ago, he proposed a new venture. "Lee, honey, I want to get into property flipping," he'd announced one night over dinner. "The market is ripe for it. Buy low, do some cosmetic fixes, sell high. It's guaranteed money." I was hesitant. It was a risky market, and we had a comfortable life. "I don't know, Jace, it seems like a big gamble. My income is steady, but it's not infinite." Maria, who was over for dinner with Chris, immediately jumped in to support him. "Oh, Lee, you have to let him do it. Jason has a golden touch. He can see potential where no one else can. You have to be willing to take risks to get ahead." She looked at him with an admiring gleam in her eye that felt, even then, a little too personal. Chris just nodded quietly, ever the supportive friend. Against my better judgment, I agreed to help fund his first flip. He used a shell company, for tax purposes, he'd explained breezily, and the project was a moderate success. He was ecstatic, and from that point on, his real estate ventures became a central part of his identity. I saw it as his passion project, something that gave him a sense of accomplishment. I never imagined it was a tool for something far more sinister. Another memory that now haunts me is from a joint vacation we took to Italy 2 years ago. We were in a beautiful villa in Tuscany, and one afternoon, Chris and I took the kids to a local market, leaving Jason and Maria behind to rest. When we returned hours later, the villa was quiet. We found them by the pool, sharing a bottle of wine, heads close together in intense conversation. The moment they saw us, they jumped apart, their laughter a little too loud, a little too forced. "There you are," Maria exclaimed, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "We were just talking about a new sales strategy for my team. Jason has such a brilliant mind for this stuff." Jason just draped an arm over my shoulder and kissed my temple. "Just helping out a friend, honey. You know me, always networking." I felt a faint prickle of unease, a sense of being an outsider in my own life, but I pushed it down. This was Jason, my husband. This was Maria, my friend. To suspect anything more felt like a betrayal on my part. I told myself I was being paranoid, that their friendship was simply close. It was easier to believe that than to confront the alternative. The truth is, the structure of our life tojeth. R was so comfortable, so familiar, that I couldn't bear the thought of testing its foundations. I was the architect who was too afraid to inspect her own home for fear of what she might find. The first real crack in my perfect world didn't come with a bang, but with a quiet digital whisper. It started with the small inconsistencies. Jason, who was usually an open book about his schedule, became vague. Client meetings became a common refrain, often running late into the evening. "Gotta go show a property," he'd say, grabbing his keys with a distracted air that was new to him. At first, I chalked it up to his flipping business taking off. He was busier, more driven, and I wanted to be a supportive wife. Then came the business trips. He had to fly out to a real estate conference in Chicago. 2 weeks later, Maria mentioned she'd just gotten back from a sales summit, also in Chicago, on the exact same dates. When I brought it up, they had a seamless explanation. "What a small world," Jason laughed, not missing a beat. "We were in the same city and didn't even know it. I was swamped with workshops from dawn till dusk." Maria nodded, sipping her wine at our weekly dinner. "Same here. My company had me in back-to-back presentations. We should have tried to connect. We could have claimed dinner on our corporate cards." It was plausible, it was logical. Yet a tiny, cold knot formed in my stomach. As an architect, my mind works on precision and patterns. 2 separate business trips to the same city on the same dates felt like a coincidence too neat, too perfect. It was like finding 2 support beams in a building that didn't align with the blueprints. You might not know why they're wrong, but you know they are. The unease grew, a low hum beneath the surface of my daily life. I started noticing little things. A new, expensive cologne he was wearing. The way he angled his phone away from me when a text came through. The password on our home computer, which had been our shared pet's name for a decade, was suddenly changed. When I asked him about it, he waved it off. "Oh, just a security update, honey. The system made me pick something more complex. I'll write it down for you." He never did. The real tipping point, the moment suspicion hardened into sickening certainty, came on a quiet Tuesday night. Jason was out at another late showing. I was tidying up my digital files, organizing project photos on our shared family cloud account. It was a habit of mine, keeping things orderly. As I was clearing out old folders, I clicked on the recently deleted album. I rarely looked in there, but for some reason, that night I did. And there it was. The photo was time-stamped from 3 weeks prior. It showed Jason and Maria sitting at an outdoor table at a picturesque winery in the next county. They were laughing, their heads tilted together, sharing a flight of wine. Maria's hand was resting on Jason's arm, a gesture of casual intimacy that sent a shockwave through me. In the background, a distinctive stone fountain was clearly visible. My breath caught in my chest. I remembered that day perfectly. Jason had told me he was spending the day with a contractor, finalizing renovation details for a flip property. Maria had told Chris and me that she had an all-day client meeting that she absolutely couldn't miss. Their separate stories, their separate alibis, converged in this one, damning photograph. My mind raced, connecting the dots with horrifying speed. I enlarged the photo, my hand trembling as I moved the mouse. The metadata was still attached. It showed the exact date, time, and most importantly, the GPS coordinates. I frantically typed the coordinates into a map search. The result came up instantly: Vineyard Vistas Winery. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a casual lunch. This was a planned, secret meeting, shrouded in a web of coordinated lies. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to grip the edge of my desk. Every excuse, every late night, every business trip suddenly replayed in my mind, now cast in a sinister new light. The inconsistencies weren't just inconsistencies, they were calculated deceptions. But who had taken the photo, and why was it deleted? It was a selfie, taken from a low angle, as if one of them had snapped it quickly. Perhaps it was deleted in a moment of panic, a clumsy attempt to erase the evidence. But they had forgotten about the cloud. about the digital ghost that remained in the recently deleted folder for 30 days. They had forgotten that they were lying to an architect, a woman who lived and breathed details. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the image on the screen. The happy, smiling faces of my husband and my best friend felt like a cruel mockery. The foundation of my life, the structure I had so carefully built and maintained, was crumbling around me. Every shared memory felt tainted, every laugh felt hollow. My first impulse was to scream, call Jason and demand an explanation. To forward the photo to Chris and blow their worlds apart in a single, explosive moment. But as the initial shock subsided, a different feeling began to take its place. It was a cold, quiet resolve. An architect doesn't demolish a faulty structure with a wrecking ball if there are people still inside. They assess the damage, draw up a new plan, and dismantle it piece by piece, ensuring the safety of what can be salvaged. A direct confrontation would lead to more lies, denials, and gaslighting. They would twist the story, claim it was an innocent misunderstanding, and paint me as the jealous, paranoid wife. I wouldn't get the truth. I would only get more deceit. No, I would not give them that satisfaction. If they could build such an elaborate structure of lies, I would use my own skills to deconstruct it. I would be methodical. I would be precise. I would gather my evidence piece by piece until I had a blueprint of their betrayal so undeniable that not even they could argue against it. That night, sitting alone in the glow of my computer screen, I made a decision. I would not be a victim in the collapse of my own home. I would be the architect of its controlled demolition. The days following my discovery were a masterclass in self-control. On the outside, I was the same Lee. I went to work, I managed my projects, I made dinner, and I smiled at Jason when he came home. I listened to him talk about his day, the difficult clients, the frustrating delays with contractors, all while the image of him and Maria at the winery was burned into my mind. Every word he spoke felt like a performance, and I was now a critic in the audience, analyzing every line for its hidden meaning. My grief and anger were immense, a roaring fire in my chest. But I channeled that inferno into a cold, focused energy. My mind, usually occupied with building codes and spatial dynamics, was now entirely dedicated to a new project, mapping the true architecture of my husband's life. My first step was to move past emotion and into information gathering. A confrontation would be based on my feelings. A methodical takedown had to be based on indisputable facts. I needed more than a single deleted photo. I needed a complete set of blueprints for their affair. I started with the most logical place, their schedules. Jason and I still had a shared digital calendar for family events, but I suspected he had a private one for his work. One evening, while he was in the shower, I picked up his phone. My hands were shaking, not from fear of being caught, but from the sheer weight of the violation. For 15 years, I had prided myself on our mutual trust. Now, I was breaking that trust to expose his infinitely greater betrayal. His phone was locked with a new passcode. I tried a few obvious combinations, birthdays, our anniversary, with no luck. But then I remembered his smug comment about his first property flip, how it was the start of his empire. I typed in the address of that property, a sequence of numbers and a street name. The phone unlocked. A bitter smile touched my lips. His ego was his password. I quickly navigated to his calendar. As I suspected, there was a second, color-coded calendar labeled Work. It was filled with entries like Client Meeting Henderson, Final Walkthrough Oak Street, and Investor Lunch. I then went to Maria's social media, where she often posted vague professional updates. Her public-facing LinkedIn profile mentioned attending a regional sales conference on a specific date. I checked Jason's calendar. On that same day, he had an entry for an all-day real estate seminar 2 towns over. It was a pattern, consistent and damning. Their business trips, their seminars, their client lunches, they all lined up, creating a shadow schedule of their time together. I spent 2 hours cross-referencing their claimed activities over the past 6 months, taking pictures of his phone screen with my own. The result was a timeline of deceit so blatant it was almost insulting. They weren't just being careless, they were arrogant. They believed they were smarter than everyone else, especially me and Chris. Next, I turned to the finances. Jason had his own business account for his real estate ventures, which I had access to as his initial investor. I had stopped monitoring it closely after the first year, trusting him to manage it. Now, I logged in with a sense of dread. At first glance, everything looked normal. Payments to contractors, commissions from sales, closing costs. But an architect knows that the most important parts of a structure are often hidden. I started looking at the details. There were recurring payments to vendors I didn't recognize. I saw several large withdrawals listed as marketing and development, but they were made out to a company I'd never heard of. Apex Holdings, LLC. There were also numerous expenses at high-end restaurants and hotels in seedy E's where he'd claimed to be on solo business trips. One charge stood out: a 2-night stay at a boutique hotel in the wine country, the same weekend as the deleted photo. Who was Apex Holdings? I did a quick search. The company was registered just last year. The business type was listed as financial consulting. It felt off. Jason was a real estate agent, not a financial consultant. I dug deeper, using my firm's access to public records databases. I searched for the registered agent of Apex Holdings. The name that came back made my blood turn to ice. It wasn't Jason. The sole proprietor and registered agent of Apex Holdings, LLC, was Maria. I pushed back from my desk, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was no longer just about a secret affair. An affair was a betrayal of the heart. This was something else entirely. This was a calculated, premeditated partnership. Jason was funneling money from his business account into a shell company owned by Maria. The pieces started to click into place with terrifying clarity. The property flipping business, his sudden ambition, Maria's enthusiastic encouragement, it wasn't about him finding a passion. It was about creating a pipeline. Why? What were they doing? My architectural mind began to build a new model, one made of lies instead of steel and glass. An affair explained the secret meetings. But a secret company, that suggested a long-term plan. They weren't just sneaking around for romantic trysts. They were building something together. A new life, perhaps, funded by what? The what was a question I wasn't ready to answer, but the need to know became an obsession. I bought a small, inexpensive GPS tracker, the kind people use for their luggage. One morning, as Jason was getting ready for work, I told him I needed to borrow the family tablet to show some designs to a client on site. "Of course, honey," he said, barely looking up from his phone. "Just make sure you have it back by tonight. I have a late showing and need it for the presentation." I took the tablet, and in the privacy of my office, I carefully pried open the back casing and secured the tiny tracker inside. That evening, I gave it back to him with a smile. "Thanks, it was a huge help." That night, his late showing was at a property on the other side of town. But the GPS tracker on my phone told a different story. The tablet wasn't at a residential property. It was sitting stationary in the parking lot of a secluded, upscale restaurant miles away from where he claimed to be. It stayed there for 2.5 hours. I had my blueprint of their affair. But as I stared at the blinking dot on my phone screen, I knew this design was incomplete. There was a hidden level, a secret basement to this structure of deceit that I hadn't uncovered yet. And I realized, with a chilling certainty, that I was no longer just investigating a cheating husband. I was on the verge of uncovering a conspiracy. The discovery of Maria's shell company, Apex Holdings, changed the entire scope of my investigation. The emotional, gut-wrenching pain of the affair was still there, a constant, dull ache. But now it was overlaid with a cold, analytical dread. An affair could be explained away as a crime of passion, a moment of weakness. But creating a limited liability company and secretly funneling money into it, that was a crime of intention. I began to approach the problem as I would a complex architectural project with a hidden, dangerous flaw. I had to understand the full extent of the structural weakness before I could plan the demolition. For the next few weeks, I lived a double life. By day, I was Lee the architect, designing homes and collaborating with clients. By night, I became a forensic accountant, piecing together the financial puzzle my husband and his lover had created. The GPS tracker on the tablet became my silent informant. 3 or 4 times a week, Jason's late-night showings or contractor meetings would lead him to quiet restaurants, secluded parks, or the parking lots of nondescript office buildings. Each time, a quick check of Maria's public social media would reveal a corresponding excuse. A networking dinner, a client emergency. They were meeting constantly, far more than was necessary for a simple affair. Their obsession wasn't just with each other, it was with their secret project. My next breakthrough came from digging deeper into Apex Holdings, LLC. Using the business registration number, I was able to pull up more public filings. The company was less than a year old and had almost no public footprint, which was suspicious for a financial consulting firm. The real revelation came when I expanded my search to property records. I searched for properties bought or sold by Apex Holdings. The result hit me like a physical blow. Apex Holdings, LLC, Maria's company, had recently purchased a residential property. It was one of the houses Jason had flipped. I remembered the pro. Pretty well. It was a charming little bungalow that Jason had bought for a steal, claiming the owner was in a hurry to sell. He'd done some quick cosmetic work and announced he'd sold it for a handsome profit a few months later. He was so proud, celebrating it as proof that his business instincts were finally paying off. He had even complained about the buyer's agent being a real shark. But the records showed a different story. Jason hadn't sold the property to a stranger on the open market. His real estate company had sold it directly to Apex Holdings, to Maria. The price was suspiciously low, barely above what he'd paid for it. Suddenly, it all made sense. The profit he'd celebrated was a complete fabrication. He wasn't flipping houses for a public profit. He was using his business to acquire properties, do minor renovations at our shared expense, and then sell them to Maria's shell company for a song. They weren't building equity for us, they were secretly transferring assets into her name. I felt a dizzying wave of betrayal that was sharper and more profound than anything I had felt before. This wasn't just infidelity. This was theft. He was using my financial stability, the security I had worked so hard to build for our family, as the seed money for a new life with another woman. My support, my trust, my belief in him, they were all just resources for him to exploit. The anger was so intense it almost choked me. How many other properties were there? How much of our money had he siphoned away into this fraudulent scheme? I needed access to the Apex Holdings bank account, but that was impossible without a subpoena. However, I didn't need to see her account to understand the flow of money. I needed to see where it was coming from. If Jason was selling the properties to her for cheap, where was she getting the money to buy them, even at a discount? Maria had a good job as a sales director, but was her income high enough to secretly purchase multiple properties? I turned my focus to Maria. Her professional life was something I knew only superficially. She was a top performer, a superstar at her tech company. I started looking into her employer, a large, publicly traded corporation. I read their annual reports, their press releases, anything to understand her role. As a sales director, she would manage a large team and control a significant budget for client relations, marketing, and business development. A cold thought began to form in my mind. The line items in Jason's business account that he was funneling to Apex Holdings were labeled marketing and development. The large budgets Maria controlled at her company were for the same purpose. Was it possible? It was a leap, a theory based on a pattern. But architects are trained to see patterns, to understand how one part of a system connects to another, even if they aren't touching directly. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place by accident. Chris, Maria's husband and my dear, oblivious friend, called me one afternoon. He sounded worried. "Lee, can I ask you something? It might be weird," he started, his voice hesitant. "Has Jason mentioned Maria's work lately? She's been so stressed, working insane hours. She keeps talking about this massive new project, some huge new client account she landed. She said the commission is going to be life-changing." My hand tightened on the phone. "Oh, really? That's great for her," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Jason hasn't mentioned it, but he's been buried in his own projects." "Yeah, that's the thing," Chris continued, a note of confusion in his voice. "She's been taking out these huge cash advances on her corporate card for client entertainment. Like thousands of dollars at a time. She says she has to wine and dine them, but it just seems like a lot. When I asked her about it, she got really defensive. Am I crazy, or is that unusual?" I closed my eyes, the entire ugly blueprint crystallizing in my mind. Cash advances. A huge, life-changing commission. Stress and secrecy. It wasn't a commission, it was embezzlement. Maria was using her position as sales director to embezzle money from her company, likely by creating fake client expenses and taking cash advances against them. That cash, untraceable, clean, was then deposited into the Apex Holdings account. She was using that stolen money to buy the properties that Jason was laundering through his real estate business. It was a complete, self-sustaining cycle of crime. He would acquire the asset using our money, and she would buy it from him using stolen money, effectively washing it clean. Together, they were building a real estate portfolio, a secret nest egg funded by theft and betrayal, all while playing the roles of loving spouses and loyal friends. The weight of the discovery was crushing. I wasn't just married to a cheater, I was married to a criminal, and our best friends, the couple we had built our lives alongside, were his partners in crime. Chris was as much a victim as I was, blissfully unaware that his wife was a thief and his best friend was helping her. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in my office, the evidence laid out before me, the photos from the winery, the GPS tracks, the property records, the corporate filings. It was a portfolio of ruin. My initial plan to expose an affair seemed laughably naive. This required more than a confrontation. This required a reckoning. The foundation was rotten to its core. It was time to bring the whole building down. With the full, horrifying picture now clear, my emotional state underwent a final transformation. The fiery anger and the cold grief settled into something different, a steely, unshakable resolve. The pain was still there, a deep wound that would take years to heal, but it no longer controlled me. I was no longer a victim reacting to betrayal. I was the architect of a plan, and my purpose was singular: to expose the truth in a way that would leave no room for doubt, denial, or escape. My focus shifted from investigation to presentation. I had the what, the affair, the shell company, the embezzlement, the money laundering. Now I needed the how. How could I present this information so that its impact was total and undeniable? A quiet conversation wouldn't do. An email would be deleted. I needed a stage. I needed an audience. The perfect opportunity presented itself with a grim sense of irony. Our wedding anniversary was in 3 weeks, and as fate would have it, Chris and Maria's was the week after. For years, we had celebrated our anniversaries together, usually with a fancy dinner for the 4 of us. It was our tradition. This year, I would use that tradition as my weapon. I brought it up casually one evening. "Jason, our anniversary is coming up," I said, my voice as light as I could manage. "I was thinking, why don't we do something special this year? A joint celebration with Chris and Maria at that new upscale place downtown, the Alistair." Jason looked up, a flicker of something, panic, guilt, in his eyes before he masked it with his usual charm. "The Alistair, honey, that place is impossible to get into, and it's incredibly expensive." "I know," I said with a small smile, "but I think we deserve it. It's been a big year for you with the business doing so well. Let me handle it. It'll be my treat, a celebration of all our success." The mention of his success sealed the deal. His ego wouldn't let him refuse. "Well, if you put it that way, okay, honey, that sounds amazing. I'll tell Chris. He and Maria will be thrilled." He had no idea. The Alistair wasn't just any restaurant. It was the same secluded, upscale establishment where the GPS tracker had placed him and Maria during one of their secret meetings. Choosing it was a deliberate, calculated move. I wanted them to walk into that room feeling comfortable, safe in one of their chosen hiding spots, only to have that safety shattered. With the venue set, I began preparing my case. I spent the next 3 weeks assembling what I internally called the portfolio of ruin. It wasn't a collection of documents. It was a narrative of their entire scheme, bound in a professional black leather portfolio, just like the ones I used for my architectural presentations. I started with the affair. I printed the deleted photo from the winery in high resolution. I created a calendar, stark and clinical, showing their overlapping business trips and late nights. I included printouts of the GPS tracking data, mapping their secret meetings with dates and times. Then came the financial structure. I created a flowchart, a visual diagram of their money laundering scheme. A box for our marital assets led with an arrow to a box for Jason's real estate company. From there, another arrow pointed to a box labeled Apex Holdings, LLC, with Maria's name clearly printed underneath as the sole proprietor. An arrow from a box labeled Maria's corporate employer pointed to Apex Holdings with the note, source of funds via fraudulent expense reports. Finally, arrows from Apex Holdings pointed to a series of boxes, each one representing a property they had secretly acquired. To back up the flowchart, I included the hard evidence. I had copies of the property deeds, showing the transfers from Jason's company to hers. I printed the corporate registration for Apex Holdings. I even managed to find, through a public records search on a legal database, a list of standard corporate penalties for embezzlement and fraud in our state, which I included as the final page. Every document was placed in a clear plastic sleeve. Every detail was checked and double-checked. This portfolio was the most important project of my life. It had to be flawless, its logic unassailable. This wasn't about revenge in the heat of the moment. It was about justice, delivered with the cold, hard precision of a blueprint. During this time, my interactions with Chris were the most difficult part. He would call to chat, completely oblivious, and his cheerful, trusting voice was like a knife in my heart. He would talk about how proud he was of Maria, how her big commission was going to change their lives, and how lucky he was to have a best friend like Jason. Every word was a testament to his innocence and the depth of the betrayal against him. It solidified my resolve. My plan wasn't just for me, it was for him too. He deserved to know the truth, even if it would destroy him. The night of the anniversary dinner arrived. I dressed with care, choosing a simple, elegant black dress. I felt strangely calm, the way you do when you've prepared for a major presentation down to the last detail. The anxiety was gone, replaced by a profound and heavy certainty. Jason was in high spirits, complimenting my dress, excited for the fancy dinner. He had no inkling that he was a man walking toward his own execution. As we drove to the restaurant, he reached over and took my hand. "I love you, Lee," he said. 15 years, can you believe it? I looked at him, at the man I had loved and built a life with, and I felt a pang of sorrow for the woman I used to be, the one who would have believed him. I squeezed his hand back, my voice even. "No, I can't." We arrived at the Alistair. It was exactly as I'd pictured, dim lighting, hushed tones, the clinking of expensive silverware. Chris and Maria were already at the table, laughing about something. They both looked stunning. They were the picture of a happy, successful couple. "Lee, Jason, there you are," Maria said, her smile wide and brilliant. "Happy anniversary, you two." We exchanged hugs and pleasantries. The fakeness of it all was suffocating. We ordered a bottle of champagne to celebrate. As the waiter poured the drinks, Jason raised his glass. "A toast," he said, beaming. "To 15 years of marriage to the most amazing woman I know. And to the best friends a guy could ask for, to success, to friendship, and to the future." Chris and Maria raised their glasses, echoing the sentiment. I raised mine, too. I looked each of them in the eye, my gaze lingering for a moment on Jason, then on Maria. "To the future," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "And to the truth, because I think it's time we all saw the real blueprints." I reached down and placed the black leather portfolio on the center of the table with a soft, definitive thud. The thud of the portfolio on the table silenced the cheerful chatter. 4 pairs of eyes stared at the sleek black binder. It looked official, serious, and completely out of place next to the champagne flutes and bread basket. "What's this, Lee?" Chris asked, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. "Did you bring work with you?" Jason laughed nervously. "Honey, come on, we're celebrating. Whatever it is, it can wait." He reached for the portfolio, intending to move it aside, but I placed my hand firmly on top of it. "No," I said, my voice steady and clear, cutting through the restaurant's ambient hum. "It can't wait. This is my anniversary gift to all of us." I looked directly at Jason, then at Maria. The confident smirks on their faces began to falter, replaced by a dawning unease. They recognized the look in my eyes. It wasn't the look of a loving wife. It was the look of a prosecutor. I opened the portfolio. "I've been working on a new project lately," I began, my tone conversational, as if I were presenting to a client. "It's a very complex structure, built on a foundation of secrets and lies. I thought, for our anniversary, I would walk you through the design." I turned the portfolio around so they could all see. The first page was the high-resolution photo from the winery. Jason's face went pale. Maria's smile vanished, her lips pressing into a thin, hard line. Chris leaned forward, squinting. "Hey, isn't that Vineyard Vistas? I didn't know you two went there together." "We didn't," I said simply, turning the page. "This next document is a timeline." I pointed to the color-coded calendar I had recreated. The blue entries are Jason's business trips and late-night showings. The pink ones are Maria's sales conferences and client dinners. As you can see, over the past year, they have lined up perfectly 27 times. Chris stared at the page, his mind slowly processing the information. He looked from the calendar to Jason, then to his wife, a deep, wounded confusion in his eyes. "What is this, guys? What's going on?" Jason finally found his voice, a choked, panicked sound. "Lee, this is insane. You're taking things out of context. Maria and I are friends. We sometimes run into each other." "Do you also run into each other at secluded hotels?" I asked, turning to the next page, which showed the hotel bill from the wine country, paid for by Jason's business account. "And do you run into each other in the parking lot of this very rest? Orient when you're supposed to be on opposite sides of the city?" I added the GPS printouts to the growing pile of evidence. Maria slammed her hand on the table. "Enough, Lee, you are making a fool of yourself. This is a pathetic, paranoid fantasy. You've always been jealous of my friendship with your husband." "Am I jealous of your company too, Maria?" I asked, my voice dropping to a steely whisper. I turned to the centerpiece of my presentation, the flowchart. "This is Apex Holdings, LLC, your company, registered by you 6 months ago." I watched Chris's face as he read his wife's name on the corporate filing. The confusion was dissolving into pure horror. "And this," I continued, tracing the arrows with my finger, "is how it works. Jason uses our money to buy undervalued properties. He then sells them at a loss to your company, Maria. And where do you get the money to buy them? You embezzle it from your employer, filing fraudulent expense reports and taking cash advances for client entertainment that never happened." I slid the final pieces of evidence across the table. The property deed in the name of Apex Holdings, a copy of the corporate bank transfer, and the printout from Chris's own call to me, where he had worried about her cash withdrawals. The silence that followed was absolute. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. Jason was slumped in his chair, his face ashen, staring at the documents as if they were a death sentence. Maria was ramrod straight, her expression a mask of cold fury. The charismatic sales director was gone, replaced by a cornered predator. But my focus was on Chris. He looked down at the portfolio, then up at his best friend and then at his wife. The realization hit him, a visible wave of devastation. His face crumpled, and he let out a sound that was half sob, half gasp. "All this time," he whispered, his voice cracking. "All this time. You weren't just lying to me, you were stealing, both of you." He looked at Jason. "My best friend and my wife." Jason finally spoke, his voice pleading. Chris, buddy, it's not what it looks like. We can explain. Explain, Chris shouted, shoving his chair back as he stood up, his voice echoing in the now silent restaurant. Diners at other tables were starting to stare. Explain what? That my entire life is a lie. That the two people I trusted most in the world were robbing me blind and laughing about it behind my back. There is nothing to explain. He turned to Maria, his heartbreak morphing into a raw, righteous anger. That life-changing commission. Was this it? Stealing from your job so you could run away with him. Maria stood up, her composure finally breaking. You're a fool, Chris, a weak, naive fool. I built a career while you were content to just be nice. Jason sees the bigger picture. We were building a future, something better than the pathetic life you were satisfied with. Her cruel words hung in the air, a final, brutal confirmation. That was when I delivered the final blow. I slid the last document from the portfolio. Speaking of the future, I said calmly, placing the printout of the state penalties for corporate embezzlement and fraud on top of the pile. I believe the sentence for a first-time offense is 5 to 7 years, and that doesn't include the civil lawsuits from your employer or the loss of your real estate license, Jason. I took the liberty of CCing my lawyer on an email containing a digital copy of this entire portfolio. It was sent the moment we sat down for dinner. That was the end. The fight went out of them, replaced by the stark terror of consequence. Jason buried his face in his hands. Maria stared at me, her eyes filled with a hatred so pure it was almost impressive. She had been outplanned, outmaneuvered, and utterly defeated. I stood up, my own legs feeling slightly unsteady. I looked at Chris, whose face was a canvas of grief. I put a hand on his shoulder. Chris, I am so sorry. Let's go. Without another word, we walked out of the restaurant, leaving Jason and Maria sitting amidst the wreckage of their lives, with the bill for their crimes laid bare on the table between them. The days and weeks after the unveiling were a blur of lawyers, legal notices, and painful, necessary conversations. The fallout from that dinner was swift and catastrophic for Jason and Maria. As promised, my lawyer forwarded the portfolio to the legal department at Maria's company. They launched an immediate internal investigation, which confirmed everything. She was fired, and the company pressed criminal charges for embezzlement. The amount she had stolen was even higher than I had estimated. Jason's world imploded just as spectacularly. The state real estate board suspended his license pending an investigation into fraud and collusion. His reputation, the currency on which his entire career was built, was gone overnight. He tried to call me, text me, email me. Deluge of desperate apologies, excuses, and pleas for a second chance. I blocked his number and directed all communication through my lawyer. There was nothing left to say. The man I had married no longer existed, if he ever had at all. I filed for divorce immediately. The process was surprisingly straightforward. With the evidence of financial fraud so clear, he had no grounds to contest anything. He signed the papers without a fight, a broken man who had lost everything because of his own greed. Chris, my fellow survivor in this wreckage, was my rock and I was his. We navigated the initial shock together. There were long, quiet phone calls where we didn't say much, just found comfort in knowing someone else understood the precise, bizarre nature of our shared trauma. He was devastated by Maria's betrayal, not just the affair, but the cold, calculating cruelty of her actions. He initiated his own divorce proceedings, his gentle nature hardening into a firm resolve to protect himself and his children from the fallout. We met for coffee a month after the dinner. He looked tired but clear-eyed. You know, the hardest part, he told me, stirring his coffee, is realizing I never really knew either of them. I spent 20 years of my life with two strangers. I know, I replied, the truth of his words resonating deep within me. I keep going over the memories, looking for clues, but we see what we want to see. We believe in the structure we build, even when the foundation is cracking beneath our feet. He nodded, a sad smile on his face. You're the architect, Lee. You saw the cracks and you weren't afraid to expose them. You saved us. You saved me from wasting another 20 years. His words meant more to me than he could ever know. In the aftermath, I had questioned my methods. Was it too cruel, too dramatic? But seeing Chris free from the web of deceit, I knew I had done the right thing. I hadn't acted out of revenge, but out of a need for truth. My life began to settle into a new, quieter rhythm. The house felt empty at first, haunted by the ghost of the life I thought I had. But slowly, I started to reclaim the space. I converted Jason's old home office into a bright, airy studio for my own design work. I packed away the photos, the mementos of a marriage that had been a lie, and I started creating new memories that were solely my own. I found solace in my work. I threw myself into designing homes for other people, but with a new perspective. I focused on creating spaces that were not just beautiful, but honest. Structures with integrity, with nothing to hide. My clients responded to the renewed passion in my work, and my firm landed two of its biggest projects to date. Months later, on what would have been my 16th anniversary, I drove out to the lake house. It was mine now, fully and completely. The neighboring house, which had belonged to Chris and Maria, was up for sale. I walked down to the shore, the water calm and still under the autumn sky. I thought about the four of us, laughing on this very dock. It felt like a scene from someone else's life. The pain was still there, a faint scar on my heart, but it no longer defined me. It was just a part of my history, a collapsed structure from which I had managed to salvage the most important part, myself. I had spent my life designing structures for others. Now, for the first time, I felt like I was finally designing my own. It was a simpler design, quieter, but the foundation was solid. It was built not on trust in others, but on trust in myself. On my ability to see the truth, to face it, and to build something new and better from the ruins. And for the first time in a very long time, I looked toward the future and saw nothing but open space, waiting for a new blueprint. I hope my story can be a lesson for others. Check your foundations. Don't be afraid to look at the cracks. Sometimes, the most painful truths are the ones that set you free. If you are going through something similar, know that you are stronger than you think. Trust your instincts and don't be afraid to start over. You have the power to design a life of your own, one built on honesty and integrity. Thank you for listening. After listening to today's story, perhaps it has raised some new questions in your mind. Every day on Reddit, new experiences and moments create fresh stories. We are all human. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to share it. Thank you for your time, and don't forget to keep an eye out for more stories coming soon.